folks, it's time for more of my September wrap-up. This is part 2 of 3, I think, just because the videos end up being quite long otherwise. But I read some great books in the second half of September as well. All in all, a fantastic reading month. So let's get started. The first one that I read was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, and this is an epic fantasy book. It's the first in a series, and it is about a young woman who goes off to a military academy to learn the art of war, basically. And there are magical elements in there that become apparent throughout the story, so I won't go too much into the details of how the magic works, but it is there, making it fantasy. And I really loved the first part of this book. It gave me Name of the Wind vibes, in that, you know, she's learning all these new things. She goes off to this university, and there's a teacher who is very similar to Master Eladine, who is in The Name of the Wind. In fact, I would be very, very surprised if he wasn't modelled after that character. So I loved that, the dynamic between her and different characters. There's a fantastic antagonist character, and I loved how she knows her own mind, and she's very determined. She works incredibly hard to pass the test in order to get into this academy. And yeah, from the outset, you admire her for her willpower. I will say that the second part of this book dragged a bit, and I didn't enjoy it as much. And also it got very, very brutal. So I think the first part of it sort of lulls you into a false sense of security. It has, parts of it are quite hard-hitting, but not in the same way as the second part. So yeah, trigger warnings for everything in this book, pretty much. Yeah, it's very graphic in the second part. That's all I can really say without spoilers, but just be warned. The second book was completely different, and I listened to this as an audiobook, but I actually went out and bought the physical copy because I loved this book so much. Oh, The Poppy War I gave 4 stars. This one I gave 5 stars. I will say that I was a bit biased towards this book because it is about a cellist. The main character is a cellist, and I play the cello, so I identified with many aspects of this. This is about a man called Eustace, unfortunately named Eustace, and he is about to go into radiotherapy, and so he has time alone in this isolated room where he's reflecting on his life. And that's the main part of the story, is looking back at his childhood, and it's a coming of age story in many ways, at least that part of it is. And we come to see how he is the man that he is in the story itself. And yeah, what I loved about it was the fact that he starts off playing the clarinet, I think, and he doesn't get along very well with the clarinet, but as soon as he sees the cello, he completely falls in love with it. And it just brought back all those memories for me of learning the cello to begin with. And then they do a trip to Bristol for him to get his first cello, and he's trying out different ones, and it all felt very nostalgic. So but on top of that, it is an LGBT coming of age story. Eustace is a gay man, a gay boy in the beginning of the story, and he's coming to terms with that. And so that sort of goes alongside his music, and he goes off to a music camp in Scotland. So a lot of it is very much his internal thoughts, the people around him. And yeah, all in all, I absolutely love this. I know I will be rereading it. I've got the physical book so that I can go back and sort of look at how he's put together certain passages. I love Patrick Gale's writing as well, and if you haven't read his work, I would probably suggest starting with A Place Called Winter. I think that's probably his best that I've read. I haven't read all of them, and he has got quite a repertoire. But this might be a little bit more specialised if you're I think you can enjoy it regardless, but that's what particularly made me love this book, was the musical side of things. But yeah, absolutely adored that and do recommend it. So the final 3 books that I'm going to talk about in this wrap up are 3 books in a trilogy, and this is the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy by Laini Taylor. And you will have seen possibly in my previous wrap up that I read Strange the Dreamer and really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed these as well. I didn't think they were quite as good, although that said, I've only read Strange the Dreamer and there is a second book coming out in a couple of days, and this I read as a complete work. I think it's quite different the way you experience a trilogy if you read them all in one go as opposed to over a longer period of time, or if you're waiting for the next one to come out and the next one. So I thought that the second one was dragged quite a bit. The third one got more interesting. I've got to talk about this in quite abstract terms, but it is about a woman who is living on Earth in the real world, except she gets sent on these little missions to collect teeth, and she doesn't know what the teeth are for, and we gradually come to know that there are other things in this world that she's interacting with, but she only knows a very small part of the picture. So Karu, that's her name, is an art student. She's living in Prague. She's got this amazing best friend called Susanna, who is fantastic, one of the best friends that I've read in literature. She's everything you want a literary best friend to be. Yeah, she's she's got a lot of oomph, and yeah, so she comes into it throughout the trilogy as well, which I really appreciated. And yeah, the fantasy elements, there are angels in this world. We discover fairly early on that angels exist, and I think what I most loved about this, especially in the first book, is the mystery of it, the not knowing how these magical creatures or magical beings, other races, seem to interact with the human world, and if they do or not. So yeah, it's got a little bit of it's been compared to his Dark Materials, and I can see where that comparison comes to. It doesn't feel like it in tone, but there are similar themes, especially because you've got angels. And the third book gets very interesting into it looks into ideas of sort of religion and belief in a deeper way. And again, I can't go into that without spoilers, but yeah, I thought that this was a very well constructed trilogy. I thought that the first one was the best. Like I said, the second one felt a bit slower, as often happens in second books. But yeah, then the third one, particularly towards the end of the third one, it really picked up, and all the themes kind of came back together, and I really liked and appreciated that. So I'm going to stop this part of the wrap up here, and I will go and film the other part, because otherwise it will be very, very long. But I'm thinking actually that I might start doing weekly wrap-ups if my reading continues at this pace, because I have been listening to a lot of audiobooks recently, and that might be an easier way for me to film them. It might be a bit more digestible for you guys, and yeah, let me know what you think of that, because I'm thinking that it might be better, or at the very least splitting it up into part 1 and part 2, but in some ways weekly wrap-ups might be easier to manage. So yeah, do let me know what you think of that. I will of course continue making other content. I plan to do a bookshelf tour before too long, as quite a few people mentioned in my studio tour that they'd quite like to see a more in-depth look at my books and a look at my Harry Potter collection as well. So that's it for now, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.